I've clicked onto the global tropical overview for May the 14th, 2024. As is always the case in these videos, thought that expression are mine alone, and in making decisions ahead of any tropical cyclones, look towards your local office, local emergency management, and local tropical cyclone warning center. So we have a few systems to talk about today across the tropics. We're getting into a more active period here in the tropics, and we've got a lot to go over. And I'll leave timestamps to each system that I'm going to be talking about today. We're going to first talk about Invest 92S, which is likely to develop relatively soon in the Southwest Indian Ocean near Madagascar. Then we'll talk about the West Pacific, what was 92W and what that could do over the next week out there. And we'll also talk about a new area of interest marked by the National Hurricane Center in the East Pacific as we kick off that hurricane season this week. But getting started with the Southwest Indian Ocean, I was very wrong in saying that the Southern Hemisphere is done for this cyclone season. The Southern Hemisphere is going to shut me up on that one, as the Southwest Indian Ocean is looking to develop one system at least, possibly another as we go throughout the next week here in the tropics. But you can see the most imminent threat right now for tropical development here is 92W. This system is developing fairly well north of Madagascar. You can see the tip of the island there on the south part of this map. Now, right now, it's not a tropical cyclone, main reason being it's still a bit elongated or broad overall. You can see this if you look at the low-level clouds in this infrared loop. You've got more southeasterly winds here, north of Madagascar, turning into more northwesterly winds here, well north of this convective mass here. And this sort of folds in like this to where this convection is like that. And you sort of got this egg-shaped spin overall. So it's still a bit elongated and a more broad overall. And under the definition of a tropical cyclone, this does not meet that. What you want for a tropical cyclone is a more compact area of low pressure with organized convection. And that is likely to happen. This system is in a fairly favorable environment overall, apart from some shear that you can see taking place right now with some of these thunderstorms, with their tops being sheared off towards the west. There is a lot of divergence to the south, and I wish I had a water vapor loop to pull up, or that I had already pulled up rather, but there is a lot of divergence to the south. And over the next couple of days, as the system really just sits here, the warm waters that are still in place here are likely to further aid tropical development. And one thing that we might look for particularly is this convective blob here that you see on the south side of the circulation. This could act to sort of focus the vorticity or the spin in this one spot. You might be able to see this happening already. There does appear to be a stronger area of some westerly winds here northwest of this convective blob. So if you round this out, this is much more compact than the egg shape that I outlined earlier. And this might be the storm's attempt to get a more compact area of low pressure formed. And we'll have to see how that pans out. It's going to take a little bit of time, but just an observation that I've seen on the satellite pass. Now, we don't have a good ASCAT pass really to say for sure if this is happening. This is the only one we have. It was a half pass, not a very good one to use. And this really shows, again, that more elongated area of low pressure that I pointed out on satellite. But, of course, once the system develops, the most important thing is, where's this storm going to go? Well, the good news is, for areas like Mauritius and La Reunion, where I'm sure you saw some model runs online from like the European that had a storm coming down your way, that scenario I don't think is overly likely with this system. Reason being is that this is sort of similar to Hidea a couple weeks ago. We're going to have a fairly dominant area of high pressure over South Africa that is likely to keep the system either just kept up here north of Madagascar or draw it west in a similar track to Hidea. There are opportunities for the system to try and come southeast. You can see there's a lot of troughs. All these blues that you see propagating up north, those are troughs, and those are going to allow maybe a little bit of an opportunity for the system to come a little bit southeast. But a lot of these troughs are moving very quickly. We're in a very progressive pattern down here to where not one trough is really staying around for all too long. And because of that, you get a lot of high pressure building behind all these troughs. And you can see this in the oranges here, the high pressure building back immediately. So if the system does come southeast, it's going to get shunted right back towards the northwest on the northern end of this ridge. Now, having said that, is there a possibility that the system does maybe come a little bit close to the northern tip of Madagascar? I think that is a little bit more likely than we had with Hedaya, especially with this first trough. You can see this one hangs in a little bit longer, and you can actually see on the GFS model, we actually have a little bit of a low pressure spike here, and that is 92S on that run, a little bit close to Madagascar, and this could bring some increased impacts to the northern tip of the island if this trough does hang around a little bit more like this model run does suggest. But again, this ridge is going to likely build behind it, and it's going to likely shunt it back towards the northwest. And I don't know if it's going to stall all too much there once this ridge builds in. It may just go further west. Though I suppose it's possible it does, and that could cause some increased rainfall issues for northern Madagascar if, say, a scenario unfolds where the eastern end of this ridge is a bit weaker, and say this trough is maybe a little bit more able to poke its nose north and maybe just keep the system stalled out here. There are some model solutions from like the European ensemble members that do show this taking place. You can see this is the ensemble map, and I'll zoom this in so you can see it a little bit better. You can see there's Madagascar, and here's all the massive tracks from the European ensemble, with a lot of them just stalling out here north of the island, but also some taking a track like Hedaya to where it comes west, maybe towards the coastline of Africa. And if it does become more of a threat to Africa, we'll talk about that in later times. But as of right now, I don't see any major threats to land from this. The only threat I really see from this is to maybe northern Madagascar if it does get far enough south for that. But in terms of impacts to, say, Mauritius and La Reunion, not looking very likely out of this one right now. And this could be your last chance of an impact throughout the season. Now, I'm not going to try and jinx that like I did saying the season overall was over in the southwestern Indian Ocean and the southern hemisphere in general, especially because we could have another system forming as well, and I'll get to that in just a second. First of all, here's the tropical weather outlook from Meteo France. You can see they're giving a high chance of the system developing. I'm more inclined to agree with that estimate, as the system looks to be doing fairly well for itself right now, and the environment is likely to favor it over the next couple of days. And you can see this formation area here showing where it could develop over the next couple of days. And again, track right now stalling north of Madagascar, maybe moving west, but there is potential that it comes a little bit further south and brings some increased rainfall. So for those there that may be concerned for some flooding impacts, make sure you stay tuned to Meteo Madagascar and Meteo France for the latest information on the system once it does form. But more on the potential for other tropical development in the southwestern Indian Ocean as we go throughout the next week or two. Right now we have the MJO back in the Indian Ocean. That's why we're seeing this development of the storm right now. And as this progresses east over the next, say, week, we're going to be looking at a westerly wind burst event taking place across this part of the Indian Ocean. Now, there's potential for development on both sides of the hemispheres here, or both sides of the equator, rather, here from this westerly wind burst. And we could potentially be looking at either one storm on either side of the equator, or maybe one on both. That has happened before. But you can see some ensemble members trying to hint at that here on the European. We've got some members in blue there trying to show maybe something trying to spin up here in the southwestern Indian Ocean. Now, in terms of where the system could track, how strong could it get? It's quite early to say for sure, because this is, a week out potentially, or longer than that. But just a note that we could potentially be looking at impacts, or development rather, here in the southwestern Indian Ocean. And I do want to go back to this website again, and I want to show the northern Indian Ocean as well. As, like I said, we could have development on both sides of the equator here. You can see that we do have tracks here, a lot more tracks than the European. The European seems to be favoring the Bay of Bengal here, but a lot of tracks may be showing some chance for development here in the Bay of Bengal as we go throughout the next week. And I'll have more discussions on this as time goes on, as we have a lot to talk about today. So I'm not really going to be going into detail on this, but this is important to note, as some model runs have been showing continuously the potential for tropical cyclone impacts along a large region of the coastline in the Bay of Bengal. So for those here, it's worth monitoring for the potential development there. And the same in the southwestern Indian Ocean, though I don't know if this will really be any land threat compared to the northern Indian Ocean system. But now moving east, the MJO is going to continue moving east and eventually move back into the West Pacific. You might recall that we were here a few days ago talking about Invest 92W. That is no longer here. We no longer have any invests in the West Pacific. We just have the remnant big area of low pressure. It's a gyre, if you will, just a very large area of low pressure north of the equator. And really, the system is not likely to do all too much over the next couple of days. Until the MJO comes in, and we're just going to be seeing a lot of convective activity here along this broad mass. Now, once the MJO comes back in, we're going to get a more favorable push of westerly winds, and we're also going to be getting more rising air. So you'll see this become likely a lot more convectively active. So you'll see a lot more thunderstorms develop on this. Now, this system is very broad right now, so we're not likely to see, even when the MJO comes in, very rapid development, but we could still see development either way. And in terms of track, we talked about a few days ago how it was mainly looking to come towards the Philippines, maybe Palau as well. That is not looking as likely for the only track that the system could take overall. It still could come that way, but now we're looking at maybe more of a track into the central tropical Pacific, maybe becoming a threat more for portions of the Mariana Islands here, like Guam, Tinian, Saipan, islands like that. And you can see this here on the European model, where we have some tracks now coming out into the central tropical Pacific. And we now have some ensemble members wanting a storm to come out here to the Mariana Islands, something that maybe makes the gap between the Philippines and these islands, and maybe something that still comes towards the Philippines. Now, track right now is highly uncertain, one reason being that we have just a very broad gyre, like I said, here north of the equator. But also, it depends on how intense does the storm get after formation. If we see earlier development, we could see the system get maybe a little bit stronger. You can see in these yellow tracks here, and you can see it here in this plot, this satellite imagery plot here. We have some winds aloft pushing things towards the north overall. So if you get a stronger storm, the net steering flow is going to take into account some of this flow, and you're going to get a track that is more moving towards the north, rather than if you have a weaker system following the easterly trades moving towards the Philippines. So in terms of track right now, the key message really is we could see a track anywhere from the Philippines to the Mariana Islands. And anyone here in these areas need to just monitor the system for the next week or two as it slowly develops here in the West Pacific. Now, again, like I said a few days ago, this is not an imminent tropical threat. This is not going to be a rapid development thing. But when it does develop eventually, or if it does, we could be looking at some impacts here, and monitor it over the next few days. Stay tuned to Bagasa if you're in the Philippines, the National Weather Service if you're in the Mariana Islands. But we're not done. We're now moving into the East Pacific as we're just now a day out from hurricane season. This time tomorrow night at the midnight UTC, May 15th, it will be hurricane season in the Pacific. As hard as it is to believe, it's already May, and we're now looking at the potential for our first system here in the tropical Pacific. Now you can see the reason why. We have a very active intertropical convergence zone and monsoon trough here south of Mexico. You can see it draping out across much of the tropical Pacific, but it's most convectively active here in the eastern part. Likely one reason being is that you have a large area of high pressure. You can see it here in the upper level cirrus clouds moving in a clockwise manner like this, and this is just fueling, if you will, all this convection on the eastern end of this intertropical convergence zone. Now, with all this convection that's ongoing here, an area of low pressure is likely to develop at some point within this mass. And once that happens, the environment, as you can tell with this upper level ridge, is forecast to be favorable for that to continue on and develop into a tropical cyclone. Now, right now, there's not a lot that I can tell you in terms of track or really intensity overall. The general consensus is that the system will be moving off towards the west eventually after formation, and this seems to be like a pretty good idea. We have a large area of high pressure that's forecast to be in place from central Mexico backing into the Caribbean, and that will likely push it west. But having this broad area of convection does make that a little bit more tricky to get exactly specific with track. Main reason being is that you don't know where the area of low pressure is exactly going to form in this. We've had some models that have tried to form something out here, and in that case you would likely just not get any land impacts at all. On the other hand, if you get something forming here closer to Mexico, then you could increase the chance of land interaction there, especially because this is also a very broad low, or likely to be a broad low when it does develop. You can see that here on the GFS 850 millibar flow plot, and you can see the broad low right here, and this is would be an interesting scenario for track, because while the overall gyre, if you will, is going to move towards the west, because here's your high pressure system over the Caribbean, as the system does develop, if you get a compact area of low pressure, say, developed here on the southwest side of this big gyre, you can get, it's similar to what you have in hurricanes when they're going through the finishing phases of an eye wall replacement cycles. Those are called trichodal wobbles in hurricanes, but it's where this low is going to revolve around this bigger low that's embedded within, and you're going to get more sporadic tracks overall as it revolves around that. So say if you get this broad area of low pressure and you get more of a compact one, while the entire thing is moving west, this low could revolve around it in a way that gets it very close to the coastline of Mexico, and that could be your threat for, I'd say, a landfall. I'd say right now a landfall is not overly likely, but if we're going to see one, I think that's the most likely scenario here in Mexico. Now, in terms of intensity, I don't think it's going to be overly strong. Now, will it likely become, say, a stronger storm, maybe a hurricane once it gets out to sea? I think it's definitely within a realm of possibility, but in terms of intensity when it comes towards land, I think we're mainly going to look at a tropical storm there. And of course, that could still bring some issues. We could be looking at some increased rainfall here, and with the high topography across this region, you could easily get some flooding issues. That certainly bears some watching here across this portion of Mexico. But in terms of significant impacts from a potential hurricane, I don't think those odds are fairly likely at this time. Now, the National Hurricane Center has looked at all this data, and they've given the system a 30% chance of development on their tropical weather outlook. These are still tagged special tropical weather outlooks. They'll become regular this time tomorrow. But you can see 30% chance of development, and I would not be surprised. Their next one is scheduled for tomorrow afternoon. I would not be surprised at all to see them bump it up to moderate chances already, just given the guidance that we're seeing. The models are fairly certain on the system developing, and it makes sense when you look at the environment. Like I said, we've got this very large area of high pressure aloft, and this is likely to feed any system that does develop and keep wind shear down, and should allow tropical development to take place with ease. But that's all that I've got for today. Lots going on in the tropics, and I know there may be some questions of, we're seeing Pacific activity. Could this eventually translate into the Atlantic with time? It's possible, but we'll talk about that when that time comes. We'll deal with what we've got right now. But I'll have more uploads throughout the rest of the week as we go through all of these systems as they develop here. With the most imminent one, again, being 92S. And if you are in Madagascar and get impacted by the storm, of course, stay safe as always if it does come through your area. But that's all for now. Thanks for watching.